If you would like to listen to or download any or all of Power at Work's blogcasts in podcast form, they are available for streaming and download on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Overcast. Just search Power at Work on any podcast platform and enjoy all of Power at Work's podcasts. While you're there, two things we would like you to do. First, subscribe, and that way you won't miss any Power at Work podcasts. Second, please give Power at Work a 5-star rating, a like, a love, whatever is the tool that your podcast provider gives you. It helps others who care about workers and worker power to find Power at Work's content. They will be grateful, and so will we. Hello, powerful people, and welcome back to the Power Half Hour, live on LinkedIn and published for posterity on poweratwork.us. I'm Seth Harris from the Burns Center for Social Change. The Power Half Hour brings you more voices, more news, and more worker power insights, and we do it in just 30 minutes. I've got an expert panel of 3 guests who are getting ready to enthrall you, educate you, excite you with news of worker power from around the country. Our video audience can see them arrayed in front of them. The rest of you just have to imagine who they are, because I will introduce them to you in a minute. The panelists are going to talk about the big stories and the biggest developments affecting worker power, worker and unions, and they're going to tell us about important worker power developments that are coming down the pike, that are off in our near-term future. And then at the very end, as an admittedly inadequate thank you to them, we're going to give them an opportunity for shameless plugs and shout-outs. They can promote anyone or anything they would like, and self-promotion is enthusiastically encouraged. And then, audience, if you're hungry for more, stay with us for the Power Half Hour overtime. We'll take questions and comments from our live audience. We already have some questions from the Power at Work community that was sent to us by email. I'll tell you how to do that towards the end of the show. That's going to happen in overtime in about 28 minutes. Now, one more thing before I introduce you to the people who are going to make you smarter today. Hey, audience, stay up to date with the Power Half Hour and Power at Work by following the Power at Work page on LinkedIn and subscribing to Power at Work. Just go to poweratwork.us, fill in the subscription box. We promise we won't share or give away or sell your information. It's absolutely free to you. Okay, enough preliminaries. Let's meet our panel. From beautiful Bellingham, Washington, he's an actor, a podcaster, a voiceover artist, a labor communications specialist, a SAG-AFTRA member, and a coordinator of the Labor Radio Podcast Network, of which Power at Work is a proud member. It's our buddy Harold Phillips. Harold, welcome back to the Power Half Hour.
Thanks so much for having me, Seth, and we are so proud to have Power at Work as a member of the Labor Radio Podcast Network.
And we're proud to be a member. And continuing our tour of the Pacific Northwest from the Emerald City of Seattle, Washington. She's an assistant professor of law at Seattle University's Law School, where she leads the Worker Rights Clinic. It's Elizabeth Ford. Good to see you again, Elizabeth.
It's so good to be here, Seth. Thanks for inviting me.
And a pleasure. And from the greatest city on earth and the home of the Eastern Conference champion New York Knickerbockers. She's a senior reporter covering labor and work for the city, a Power Half Hour favorite. It's Claudia Irizarry Aponte. Welcome back, Claudia.
Thanks for having me, Seth.
It's great to have you here. All right, topic number 1, panel. We're going to start with you, Harold, just to give you a little bit of warning so you can sort of get the wheels turning as we get started.
There we go.
So we're going to look over our shoulders. We're going to look in our rearview mirrors, and you are going to tell us what is the most important or most interesting development or the biggest news story relating to unions, worker power, or worker collective action over the last couple of weeks. Harold.
Well, Seth, I'm actually going to go back a little beyond the last couple of weeks to, gosh, how long has it been? Years and years and years, because I'm going to talk about Starbucks Workers United. Now, a lot of people think Starbucks Workers United has just sort of fizzled out because there's not a lot of big splashy things happening. But they are actually in negotiations with the company for a contract. And guess what? They're not going great. The company seems to be dragging its feet on some important issues. And Starbucks Workers United had a national day of action on Saturday, just a couple of days ago, where they and community members went out to non-union Starbucks stores and leafleted and talked to customers about why it's important for them to delete the app. And that's a major thing for a union that some people had thought had just kind of gone away because they're not making headlines every day. A really important headline that I think a lot of people might have missed, though, is they unionized their 700th store last week. Now, when this all started, people were talking about how impossible it was to unionize Starbucks because they had 1,100 corporate-owned stores. Starbucks Workers United unionized their 700th store last week. That's over half of the corporate-controlled Starbucks stores. So don't count them out. They are not going away. If anything, they're building even more pressure.
Yeah, the continued organizing success is really impressive, particularly given their struggles getting a first contract. You often see organizing drop off or disappear, or even decertifications happen when you can't get a contract. Starbucks Workers United is the little engine that could, man. They are still going and going and going and bringing in new members all around the country. Do you have any sense about... go ahead.
If I just may, they're still just as inspirational as they have been from the start, because at the same time Starbucks Workers United was out flyering and talking to people at non-union stores, REI workers were flyering in front of REI during their biggest sale of the year because they can't get another contract either. So Saturday is a big day and retail workers are out.
Yeah, no question about it. All right, Elizabeth, what's the biggest story, the most interesting development of the last couple of weeks affecting workers and worker power?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about a new working paper that has come. It's called Who Raises Their Voices. It's come from two researchers at the Harvard Kennedy School and David Weil at Brandeis. It is an update to the really seminal piece of data that I think we've been relying on for many years, and that is the Broken Promises research from Annetta Bernhardt and NELP that demonstrated through worker interviews that about a quarter of low-wage workers in any given week were experiencing wage theft. And this study both replicates that, but takes it forward in ways that are really useful for developing important and useful policy to address wage theft. So the study does a few important things. First, it uses a new source of data, and then second, it determines from that source of data how often low-wage workers or hourly workers are experiencing wage theft, and how often they report it, and to whom, and what the barriers are. So super important. So I'm just going to hit each of those really quick. So the data source is the 2009 study was limited to 10 cities. This is based on Facebook surveys targeting certain industries and firms. And so the industries are retail and restaurant, and the firms are selected as sort of the biggest among those. So think Walmart, PetSmart, Applebee's, et cetera, Starbucks. And this approach has resulted in almost 300,000 responses. So a really good base. If you want to know more about this methodology, about which I am not an expert, I commend to you the website on the Harvard Kennedy School's website to find out more about that. But from this data, the first thing that the researchers determined was that about 38% of hourly workers are experiencing wage theft, and 31% are experiencing serious wage theft. That means that their paychecks are smaller than they should be. And how often did workers complain? About a quarter, 25%, complained, but mostly internally and mostly to supervisors and managers. The external complaints in general are at 2%, 2%. And less than 1% of workers are complaining to an agency. So we are not seeing the sort of breadth. When we look at agency data, we are not seeing the breadth of wage theft. And in fact, we're not even seeing kind of a number that can be extrapolated forward, because the types of workers who are complaining are not demonstrative of the workers who are experiencing the wage theft. The barriers to complaint, there are a few, but the number one, as you can imagine, is fear of retaliation. That's at about 22%. A lack of information is at about 20%. And actually, this is the most prevalent. The worker doesn't think it will work. They don't think that anything can be done about it. I will say that the researchers here both asked people who didn't complain, why didn't you? And people who did you experience retaliation? And the experience of retaliation far outstrips the workers' prediction of retaliation. So they're not wrong. In fact, they are under predicting how much retaliation they will face.
It sounds like this paper is a picture of how disempowered, particularly low-wage workers are in the American economy.
Yeah. And I mean, one bright spot in here is that there is an enormous effect of union representation on workers' willingness to report externally. And so that now, so as always, right, the one of the answers here is to organize. I think there are a couple of other things that it raises. One is that solely complaint-based enforcement is not going to be effective in addressing this problem. I'm not a fan of getting rid of it altogether, but it has to be combined with some other approaches, a more strategic approach, maybe an insurance-based approach. So there's so much to be learned from this study. I think it's hugely important.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you for raising that up. And you just had to say the two words, Dave Weil, to me, to get me on board. Dave is an old friend, and I worked with him at the Labor Department, and he was the leader of the Wage and Hour Division at the U.S. Department of Labor and did a phenomenal job there. So great to hear about that. All right, Claudia. We're looking for the biggest news, the most interesting development over the last couple of weeks affecting workers and worker power. Go.
Yeah, well, this is a news that broke just over the weekend affecting people here in the New York, New Jersey area. And that's that 300 detainees at the Delaney Hall ICE detention facility in Newark launched a hunger and labor strike over the weekend, beginning on Friday. These are detainees who have been held by ICE in the privately run detention facility by GEO Group, one of the largest private prison contractors in the country. These are detainees. A lot of them, a number of them are teenagers, the elderly, people who are sick, who have been held in detention despite having won habeas corpus petitions, challenging their indefinite detention in these facilities. And on Friday, they took the decision to no longer eat or drink or work. Some of these detainees perform work for GEO Group within the facility until certain conditions are met. They want teenage detainees, the elderly, and the sick to be released immediately. They want food and water conditions to improve. They want better food. They claim that they're getting served rotten food. They claim that the water that they're being served is undrinkable and that the conditions inside the detention facility are unsanitary. Over the weekend, there were a series of very serious confrontations outside of the jail where protesters and family members and spouses of the people inside the facility have been protesting for more than a year at this point. Some folks may remember there was a confrontation just last year where the now mayor of Newark, Ras Baraka, was arrested, trying to protest, the facility within his city. And over the weekend, there was a series of congressional members. There was Senator Andy Kim of New Jersey and Senator Robert Menendez Jr. Of Union County. He represents Union County nearby the jail facility, who visited the jail and attested to the conditions that the folks who are protesting are claiming. Senator Andy Kim said that he tried the tap water that the detainees are being served. There was, as I mentioned, there was a series of confrontations just over the weekend. Senator Andy Kim was pepper sprayed as he tried to, gain access to the jail again over the weekend. It's a very serious development. DHS denies that there's a hunger strike happening, but organizers, family members of the people who are there say that there is indeed a hunger strike happening, and that, the people who are there are very serious about their demands, and they're not going to relent until certain conditions are met inside the facility. So that's something to be following for sure.
Absolutely. Let me make 2 points. Number one, this is the value of independent media like the city, is that we need independent media to push back against the lies that we're being told by our government. So that's what you're doing right now for us, Claudia, and we really appreciate it. Let me say a second thing. If you wake up in the morning and you're going to go to work making money off of imprisoning another human being, you're on the wrong path. Not just as an occupational matter or a career matter, as a moral matter, you're simply doing the wrong thing. If you are a private prison contractor, you're in the wrong business. You're doing the wrong thing. And this is all a consequence of making money off of imprisoning people. It's also a consequence of an excruciatingly exploitative, oppressive immigration strategy that our president has launched. But the people who are making money off of that strategy really should be horribly ashamed of themselves. It's really something. Okay, topic number 2. We're going to look into the future. Get out your crystal balls, guests, because we are going to look into the future and predict what is coming down the pike. Now, we're not worrying about 2096. We're worrying about the next week, the next month, the next couple of years. What is out there in the future that's going to affect workers, worker power, and unions? The biggest story, the most important story, the most important development, the most important innovation. Is there an event coming that our audience needs to know about? Elizabeth, we'll start this one with you.
Okay. So I wanted to stick with wage theft, and also having been a little bit of a downer in the first one, insert a little bit of hope, things that I think are coming that are hopeful. I think they're the most important legal work that's happening related to wage theft is happening at the state and local levels, creating bulwarks against federal action and improving both minimum standards, enforcement, and opening doors for organizing. And I think all those things are happening, and there are a lot of them happening. So I'm just going to give a flavor with apologies, is a little PNW centric, but I want to tell you a little bit about what's going on. So in Washington, the legislature just passed a bill that directs our enforcement agency to be more strategic, but while it allows for complaint-driven actions, it also opens the possibility of strategic enforcement. It enhances at the same time, the same piece of legislation enhanced penalties, allowed for aggregation, sort of class action, administrative complaints, and it created a wage recovery fund, which is a pot of money that allows the agency to pay workers with a meritorious claim up front, not to be a broker for employer payment, but to get them some money so they don't lose their housing. And then the agency's got some skin in the game, and they go after the bad actor. They should recover wages, interest, penalties, and this fund should grow. So that's happening in Washington. In addition, localities and states are really digging into the idea of sectoral protections, which is, enhancing minimum standards while also creating a table for conversations. So, for example, the Washington just passed a domestic worker bill of rights statewide. New York passed Local Law 61, which guarantees security guards minimum pay, which, by the way, is being challenged based on I think, in my opinion, borderline specious claim of machinist preemption.
Wait, can I ask you? Can I ask you a question? Who's writing the brief on behalf of Friends of the Court? I happen to be one of those Friends of the Court.
Yes.
Who's writing the brief to make the argument to the court that they're getting the preemption argument wrong?
The fabulous, brilliant Catherine Fisk from Berkeley.
Wait. Assisted by?
Assisted in some minor ways by Elizabeth Ford. But
there you
really is
That's the answer I was looking for. Don't be so modest. This is not a forum for modesty here on Power at Work, Power Half Hour. I'm sorry. Please go ahead, Elizabeth.
Okay, so more things. And you're going to see sectoral protections in the app-based space in many states, including New York and Washington and Massachusetts. LA has just passed a protection for tourism workers, San Diego, hospitality workers. So it's happening. And we're just chugging along, just doing it a little bit at a time, so that once the Wage and Hour Division is back in a position where it can be the badass enforcers that it has been, that we'll have a system that locks together. So there you go.
Okay, so I want to ask you a question, Elizabeth.
Yeah.
So we've talked here, including with David Madeline on our last show from the Center for American Progress, who's one of the leaders arguing for sectoral bargaining around the country, and he was talking about California and rideshare workers.
Yeah.
You and Harold both are very tightly tied into what is happening in Washington State. Do we expect to see more sectoral bargaining coming out of Washington State or other blue or blue tinted states beyond what we're seeing in Massachusetts and California, and Illinois is talking about it? Are you hearing about more rideshare drivers and others who are going to have this kind of sectoral bargaining relationship with their industries?
Yeah, I think so. The first tranches were like gig workers, and that was a place to go because they were, there's this big dispute: are they employees? Are they not employees? And so it was a way to circumvent that argument. Domestic workers is the other place. I do think that, and New York's been in this for a while, but that restaurant workers are the next frontier, in my opinion. There's a lot that needs to happen there. That's where many of the violations are happening. So that may be a place whereas like places like Washington and New York are going to continue to refine the existing sectoral bargaining relationships. But that's just me. I do think that this is, we have to open up spaces for negotiation and sort of support that organizing, and sectoral bargaining is one way to do it.
Excellent. Claudia, you're a soothsayer. Tell us what's coming for workers in the future.
Absolutely. Before I get to the point and the topic that I want to discuss, there's one other thing about the Delaney Hall hunger and labor strike that I wanted to mention real quick. And that is one of the developments over the weekend is that we're already seeing what some activists on the ground are allege is retaliation against the hunger and labor strikers. One of the leaders of that effort, a young man named Martin Soto from Kearney, New Jersey, was transferred out over the weekend to a different facility. Fortunately, it appears that he is still within the state of New Jersey. He was transferred allegedly to a facility out in Elizabeth. He wasn't removed from the state. But it is a move from DHS and GEO Group that activists claim is retaliation for launching this effort. His pregnant spouse has been outside every single day since he was arrested earlier this year, pleading for his release. So that's just another point that I wanted to mention. But the topic that I do want to discuss is an effort here in New York that I believe I've discussed on the show previously, and that's the No More 24 Act that's being discussed in the City Council right now. A quirk of New York State, home care worker rules. This is a law governing home care workers. Is that you as the family member or the patient, someone who needs round-the-clock care at home. You hire a home care worker for 24 hours and you pay out of pocket for that, but that worker does not get paid for the full 24 hours. They actually only get paid 13 out of the 24 hours under state rules that dictate that they only get paid 13 hours a day, provided that they get a certain number of hours of sleep and 3 meal breaks a day. Now, workers say that that does not happen. They're usually working 24 straight hours, 48, as much as 96 hours, I've heard from some workers, and only getting paid for a fraction of their time. This is something that workers have been trying to change for close to a decade here in New York, and there's an effort at the city council that would end that. And it's been met with a lot of very fierce and passionate opposition from a small group of workers, but also patient and disability advocates here in the state of New York, who fear that any changes to the current system, any drastic changes to the system right now, would leave them without care, could actually risk workers' jobs. And part of the reason for that, and we're going to get a little bit in the weeds here, is that, of course, a lot of these programs are paid by state Medicare, Medicaid funding and state health dollars that the city council does not control. It's not control the purse strings for that. And there are some lawmakers and some advocates who say that, the city council were to move to abolish the 24-hour shift system without having secured funding to pay workers' wages and to ensure that patients don't have any gaps in care, that could lead to some very serious adverse consequences for both workers and patients. It's just been like really, really like an ugly political battle here in New York, I have to say, pitting worker against patient, worker against worker. The unions are pretty split in their support for this effort. District Council 37, which is like the largest union in the city, it's an AFSCME affiliate, is passionately against this bill that would end the 24-hour shift cycle for many of the reasons that I just outlined. 1199, which is the largest home care workers union, opposed a previous version of this bill that was introduced in the city council several years ago. They're staying out of it this year. They neither support nor oppose the bill. But there's a very passionate group of home care workers, many of them elderly Asian American and Chinese women who have been really fighting for this for a long time. They also went on a 6-day hunger strike earlier this year to try to force the city council to vote on this legislation. And this is just not an issue that is going away anytime soon. The bill is in the city council right now. It has not been put forward to a vote. And frankly, at this point, the state of the bill is unclear. Without any additional state funding, it's not clear what's going to happen to these workers or their patients.
Yeah, I lived through this kind of conflict when we expanded minimum wage and overtime coverage under federal law to so-called companions, really home health workers who are supporting people with disabilities and seniors. It was very, very controversial, and the disability community and the labor movement really had a lot of tensions, a lot of complex tensions there. Now, the Trump administration is trying to roll that back, not because of people with disabilities and seniors, just because they want the least amount of regulation and the lowest wages they can possibly
Absolutely.
get.
And
Harold.
sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Please go ahead, Claudia. Finish it up. Go ahead.
I wanted to make about even the folks on the opposition here is that nobody disputes that these workers ought to be paid every single penny for every single minute that they're working. This is something that, disability advocates who oppose this bill are very passionate about themselves. They want workers to be compensated for the full 24-hour period. They're just very concerned about the funding for this effort, that without the proper funding, it's going to, it's going to fail the workers, it's going to fail patients, and a lot of lives are going to be left in the balance. So I just wanted to just make that point very, very clear.
Very important. Harold, tell us what's coming in the future. What's coming down the pike for workers and worker power?
Yeah, Seth, I know we're coming to the end of it and we don't have much time. So I'm going to keep this brief by going to the future by looking backwards. Something happened recently that's really gotten a lot of people's attention. And that's Virginia Governor Abigail Spanberger vetoing a bill that would have allowed for collective bargaining for public employees in Virginia. This has got a lot of people in the Labor Radio Podcast Network really looking at how much they can trust, frankly, Democratic politicians who say they're going to support working people. And then once they get in office, they turn around and make some questionable choices to be charitable. So looking ahead to the midterms, we're seeing a lot of working people being very, very stringent in how they look at candidates who are asking for their votes. And a lot of union and labor organization political action committees really grilling these candidates to see if they're actually going to show up for working people when they get into office. I think it's going to have a major impact on the midterms.
Yeah, thank you so much for raising this up. You're being polite. I think Governor Spanberger knifed public employees and the labor movement right in the back after promising them she would support public employee collective bargaining. There is no excuse. There is no justification. She just outright lied to them. And this is one of the reasons why people do not trust their elected officials, and particularly people in the Democratic Party who say they are pro-worker, but really are not. Now, the good news is this is the end of her career. There were people talking about her as a potential national candidate. That's now gone forever. She will never be a candidate for national office, or she'll never be a successful candidate for national office in the Democratic Party unless she turns things around in the state for working people. Okay, we have arrived at our third and final and by far most popular segment. It's shameless plugs and shout outs. Each guest will get about, and we're already at time, so we're just going to take about a minute and a half for you to plug anybody or anything you would like. You can plug yourselves. You can plug something you're working on. You can plug somebody you care about or somebody you really dislike, but you'd like to support their work. That's perfectly okay. Claudia, Aponte, what is your shameless plug or shout out?
I'm going to keep it simple. Shout out to the Knicks. Shout out to Jalen Brunson. Shout out to Karl Anthony Towns. 4 more wins.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. You know your audience. You know your audience. That's a really good one right on this show. Absolutely. The New York Knicks. Harold Phillips, what is your shameless plug or shout out?
Well, I feel like Liz and I should both shout out the state of Washington, just because for once we've got a good balance between East and West Coast here. But Labor Radio Podcast Network, you can find us at laborradionetwork.org. Look for us if you're going to the Labor Notes Conference in Chicago. There will be a table set up. We'll be conducting interviews. And follow us on the social media at Labor Radio Net, because we have a big announcement coming in coming days.
Wait a minute. You're not going to preview the announcement here on the Power Half Hour?
You know, somebody kind of said that there was an anonymous project they were working on that they didn't want to get into recently.
I'm not talking about that. All right, that's enough of you, Harold. Liz Ford, what is your shameless plug or shout out?
I'm going to plug something I'm super proud of that we're working on at Seattle University, and that is a teacher training that's called Classroom Labor. It is an in-service for K-12 teachers to give them the tools to bring collective bargaining into the classroom. So if you're a teacher in Washington, it's a one-day training. It will be on August something like 24th. We have a stipend of $150 just for participating. You get clock hours, which what we're trying to do is bring unions and collective bargaining into students' consciousnesses earlier.
I love that. Where could people go for information and actually the very specific date that they would show up for this training? Is there a website they can go to?
You know what, Seth, can I send you the flyer?
Yes, please do. Send us the flyer and we will post it up.
Okay, wonderful.
All right, audience, stick around. We're getting ready for overtime in just a few minutes. But for right now, for Claudia Aponte, Harold Phillips, Liz Ford, and our producer, Ayush Kanvalkar, thank you for joining Power Half Hour. Again, stick around for overtime. But for right now, class is dismissed. Okay, guests, take a breath. Take a sip of water, this is an opportunity to sort of be mindful, if you'd like, for just a moment. And while you are doing that, I am going to check the chat to see if we have any, I know we have some questions from our Power at Work community. Here we go. So let me turn to these. If everybody's ready, are you all ready for your questions?
I don't know if I'm ready, but we'll take a shot.
Our audience we have a really smart audience, and I'm not just kissing up to them. They're really smart and savvy, and they're watching press and social media, they're involved. They're very active. So here's the first question. This comes from Power at Work community. This is the questioner is saying, I saw a social media post about an Economic Policy Institute report showing that employers spend about $1.5 billion every year on union busting consultants and campaigns. I think union busting is disgusting. That's one of my favorite chants, by the way. What does it say about our country and our country's business community? And what does it say about workers' eagerness to join unions? Who'd like to? I saw a couple of you nodding your heads. And who wants to jump in on this one?
I think what it says about our country is that our labor laws are far too slanted towards corporations and big business. If those corporations can be allowed to spend, what was the figure? Something like $105 billion on union busting efforts. Obviously it's a two-sided conversation and the employer should have the right to make their case. But the amount of money they're permitted to spend on union busting lawyers is just obscene. And if we had labor laws that were actually a little more slated to the workers, that would be a little more even. So it wasn't such a David and Goliath situation.
Yeah, look, I'll go ahead. Go ahead, Liz. Go ahead, and I'll jump in after. Go ahead.
I totally agree with that, Harold. And also say we know from a relatively recent study that about half of workers, given the opportunity, would choose a union. And so this is exactly as you described, Harold. This is a manipulation of the and a profound misunderstanding of what the National Labor Relations Act is designed to do. It is not a competition between the union and the employer. It is a space for employees to make their choice unfettered. That's the idea. And so the idea that we've allowed the creation of this multi-billion-dollar industry to tamp down union organizing is a real abdication. And I do not let the Democrats off the hook for that. I think we all allowed this to happen. And for my part, when I see a student interested in going to Jackson Lewis or to Littler Mendelsohn, I think they need to think twice, just Seth, as you were describing earlier, about whether that's a choice, a moral choice for them.
Yeah, I'm not defensive about the legal community because I'm certainly not going to defend everything everybody in the legal community does, but it's not just lawyers who are in this industry. It's communications consultants. It's in some cases, former trade unionists who've gone to the other side and helping employers to figure out what an organizing campaign looks like and how to disrupt it, how to influence workers in captive audience meetings and other contexts. So it's not just lawyers who are doing it, but lawyers are contributing. There's no question about it. And that's, the EPI study helps us to understand one of the reasons why there's a huge amount of money involved. But what I really find most telling about this report is it absolutely puts the lie to the argument that the reason we don't have more unions and bigger unions in our country is that workers don't want to join. That's false. That's false. Because if it were true that workers were completely uninterested, I've heard it described as, this is a product nobody wants to buy, it's food nobody wants to eat. If that were true, employers would not be spending $1.5 billion a year to stop it from happening. They wouldn't have to, right? They could just let workers make their choice. But if this is what this tells you is if employers just let workers make their choice, our labor movement would grow very, very, very dramatically. No question about it. Okay, we've actually got an REI. I can't tell if this is an REI question, but it starts out talking about REI, which Harold mentioned earlier. REI workers have called for a boycott of their employer to pressure it during negotiations. Do you think consumer boycotts can work? It seems the Starbucks boycott fizzled out. Well, Harold, give you a chance to rebut that. It seems the Starbucks boycott fizzled out and had no effect on the coffee company's willingness to bargain with the union. Anybody want to jump in on that?
I've definitely heard that the Starbucks boycott effort has fizzled out. And that's a perception that Starbucks is very happy to spread. The reality is that there's a reason why shareholders and members of their board are pressuring company leadership to negotiate with Starbucks Workers United. And it's not just moral, because these folks do tend to look at a balance sheet. They look at dollars and cents. When it comes to the REI boycott, this is their biggest sale of the year. And people are staying out of the stores. Now, it takes time to see the impact of these things. And you have to look at the earning calls when they come out and that sort of thing. I guess we're just going to have to wait to see, but it is bringing attention to the struggle. And frankly, I think attention is one of the most valuable resources in this day and age, because we're pulled in so many different directions. So anything that gets people focused on retail workers and what they're fighting for, I think is a net positive.
Yeah, I think that's especially true for companies that portray themselves as if not politically progressive, sort of forward leaning. And, REI is a co-op. I'm not exactly sure what that means in their context. But they're just as union avoidant and just as anti-union as the most rapacious corporations out there. Maybe they're not Amazon. They're not doing everything Amazon is doing, but they're certainly not bargaining a contract with their union. That's what Amazon is doing. They're doing exactly the same thing. So, but I have long been a skeptic of consumer boycotts, because I don't think consumers really do boycott in most cases. I think it's very good for the unions to call for it, and I think it probably does bite to some extent. But I don't think there's a lot of evidence that it works. I think it's a tactic that should be tried. You should try to focus it particularly on consumer brands like REI and Starbucks. But I'm eager to see evidence that it is a successful strategy. I don't know. Has anybody seen any evidence that it can be successful against a large corporation like REI or Starbucks?
Right. I don't. But I do think that is exactly the issue that I sometimes wonder about, which is with so much information being sort of funneled at people and these giant corporations, that it's very difficult to understand. Certainly their finances are opaque, right? We don't get to see what the effect is. And there's, for an organizing campaign, there may be limited ways of getting in there. Even the union is entitled to some information. They're not entitled to the book. So it's really difficult to understand if there has been an effect. As you say, for a publicly traded corporation, we can see more. So one thing that I've sort of longed for is the two ends of the boycott, the initiation and the communication around the boycott, and at the other end, some information about what the effect was. Some information other than they came back to the table, right? Because I think there's a lot of steps between the boycott and getting back to the table.
Yeah, and I think Starbucks would say they're at the table, and REI would probably say that they're at the table. But in American, as you know very well, Liz, in American labor law, being at the table is no guarantee that there's going to be a deal. In fact, often it's surface bargaining that's designed to avoid getting to a deal. It's just you sort of keep the union going in process after process after process, and no deal results. And sadly, that's a very common experience with first contracts in our country, because labor, as you said before, labor law has no teeth. Labor law has no ability to force compliance with the law. It's very frustrating. Okay, so here's one that I think is going to be a more upbeat question, and here's the evidence of that. The first sentence is, unions win again, with 3 exclamation points. That's a good way to start. Unions win again. This may be one, Claudia, that you want to comment on. The unions at the Long Island Railroad showed that workers can strike and win a great contract. Is this a turnaround for labor, or is there something special about this particular strike? Claudia, you want to jump in? This is your home region.
Absolutely. I mean, and it's worth noting, this is not the only major contract that workers won in New York just in the past week. The workers represented by the Hotel Trades Council in New York, hotel workers, also won a huge contract last week. They did not go on strike, but at the end of what I believe is a 4-year contract, workers are going to be earning 6 figures for the first time ever. The lowest salaries are going to start at $100,000, which is just enormous, just wins and gains for those workers. Obviously, the union had enormous leverage, threatening a strike, right during the summer season and right before the World Cup. So it was just an enormous win for workers just on the heels of the Long Island Railroad strike. The Long Island Railroad strike, it's worth noting, it was a strike 3 years in the making. The unions and, over many, many years, tried as hard as they could and asked the federal government to intervene to prevent a strike. They really wanted a deal. They did not want to do this, and they felt that, their hand was forced, that the MTA forced, and the state of New York forced them to walk off the job for what ended up being 3 days, and they won enormous gains. It's the busiest rail line in the country, and they have always been and are now continue to be the better compensated rail workers in America. So, it's just like a tremendous leverage for the workers there, having won in their strike. It's interesting just like to know just like what exactly this effect is going to have for other rail workers in the region. New York City Transit, their contract expires this year too. I can imagine that TWU Local 100 smells blood in the water. There's a few things about this group of workers that is different from the Long Island Railroad workers. One, they are not bound by the RLA, so they legally cannot strike. It's just a completely different bargaining process. They are bound by the New York Taylor Law, which prohibits public sector workers from going on strike. Now, as we all know, that hasn't stopped workers from going on strike anyway. MTA workers memorably went on strike for a number of days in, I believe, 2005. So anything can happen, but that is kind of like the next like big like rail transit contract fight on the horizon. It's a contract that expires this year, and I bet they're gonna, be using the gains of the Long Island Railroad workers to fight for better wages and benefits as well.
Yeah. Either of you want to jump in on this, Liz or Harold, from the other side of the country, literally the other side of the country?
Well, I'd just like to throw in, Seth, that the person asking the question asked if this was a turning point for labor. And I think what we've been seeing over the past few years is the public's perception of labor actions like this turning. I don't think the Long Island Railroad strike was a turning point. I think the amount of support that these railroad workers got from the commuters who were impacted by it, who were saying, just pay them for God's sake, is huge when you contrast it to what people's attitudes might have been even 10 years ago. So people's consciousness is really shifting. And when we have actions like this, there's a lot more public support for them than there used to be.
Yeah, I think that's such a critically important point. I'm sorry, Liz, go ahead if you'd like.
Oh, no. I was going to kind of go a little left fieldy, but I'm curious, Claudia, what you think about, you mentioned because this is governed, the upcoming negotiations are governed by the Taylor Act, that the public workers don't have the right to strike. And I'm interested in what you think about the possibility of whether interest arbitration ought to be available for transportation workers, just as it is for public safety workers, or if that is a negative, because it would imply that the workers would not engage in however unlawful a strike. So it's
just for our audience's sake, I want you to define interest arbitration. Not everybody knows what that is.
So that is where an outside neutral, when the parties have reached impasse in their negotiation, an outside neutral comes in and imposes a contract on the parties. So the parties come and argue before the neutral about what's most fair, what's most in accord with the industry standard, and then the neutral is empowered to set the contract.
I don't know if that is a tool that is available here in New York for public sector contracts. I will say that there is just, a lot of talk about Long Island Railroad having set the pattern. It's a term that's used in kind of like New York, like collective bargaining, this idea that like the big unions, or they win a really strong contract, and that then trickles down to the smaller unions, or in the opposite sense, larger unions settle for what other unions believe to be an inferior contract. And then the unions that bargain after that believe that because that is the pattern that has been set, that their hands are tied, and they won't be able to ask for anything greater than that. They won't be able to get anything greater than that. I don't necessarily think that will be the case here. I will say the Long Island Railroad strike was pretty ugly in terms of like a public perception. I think public support was actually quite mixed for the Long Island Railroad workers. There was the coverage of the strike by and large emphasized just like how well compensated these electricians are, that they earn $200,000 a year with overtime. Many of them don't even live in New York City. They live in Philadelphia, they live in Pennsylvania, blah, blah, blah. Governor Hochul, a Democrat, talking about how this was a strike, she constantly emphasized that Trump authorized this strike, that this was a strike that Trump wanted in order to hurt New York City, because it was, his board that approved the strike and allowed all the 5 unions that bargained this contract, that are covered by this contract, that allowed them to go on strike. So it was like a very mixed in terms of just like public support and the messaging and just the characterization of these workers. And I think that also trickled down to just how the public felt about it. But ultimately, I think it just the strike started on a Saturday, and by Monday, like the first full work day, with just this crazy schedule, the busiest rail line in the country, public perception just flipped, and it was like, all right, just give them whatever they want so that I can get home on time and get to work on time. But anyway, yeah, to get to your original point, I'm not sure if that is a tool that is available. But yeah, it's going to be like a really interesting fight, nonetheless.
Okay, panelists and audience, thank you very much for staying for overtime. Thank you very much for staying for the power half hour. We appreciate you. We will see you again. And a special thanks to Harold and Claudia and Liz and Ayush for making this possible. Everyone, we'll see you again in 2 weeks right here on LinkedIn Live, and again, published for posterity on poweratwork.us. We'll see you on Power at Work again very soon. Are you looking for more labor radio shows and podcasts? Well, look no further. Go to the Labor Radio Podcast Network. The network connects more than 200 radio shows and podcasts. To find more great labor content, go to www.laborradionetwork.org. Power at Work is there. You should be too.